I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail,
T-minus 15 seconds.
Another SpaceX launch in California, but this one carries a payload being keenly watched by both Rocket Lab in Auckland and at Auckland University's new Mission Control Operations Centre.
Ignition and liftoff.
Wait, Mission Control at Auckland University? You heard right, and while the VIPs and media gathered at Rocket Lab to celebrate the launch, I joined space students in the basement of the university's engineering faculty to do the same thing. In hopefully less than a year, Rocket Lab will hand over to the university, which will then control and operate MethaneSat, making Auckland the first New Zealand university to operate a satellite. Right, so what is MethaneSat? It's a data-collecting satellite built by Ball Aerospace in the US and paid for by the non-profit American agency, the Environmental Defence Fund, with some help from the New Zealand government.
MethaneSat is a game changer because we'll be able to observe methane emissions at a scale and with a degree of precision that nobody has ever been able to do before. And these measurements will be instrumental in reducing methane emissions because they're going to provide tools and insights that nobody has ever had before.
First pitched to the New Zealand government in 2018, the satellite is finally now in space and expected to start sending data back to Earth within weeks. Rocket Lab and the University of Auckland will operate the mission control after New Zealand put $29 million into the mission.
And when we looked at the satellite missions that were already flying or planned, none of them produced the data that was necessary to answer the three critical questions. Where are the emissions? How much are the emissions? And how are those emissions changing over time? And to do that, to answer those questions, we needed a much higher precision satellite with fine spatial resolution.
Going to give us data about agricultural emissions on a spatial resolution that's really unprecedented. Data that's independent of ground-based estimates and that sheds new light on agricultural emissions, which are highly uncertain in key areas around the world.
The anticipation of a methane satellite has got a lot of companies and a lot of countries already thinking much more seriously about methane.
Its main goal is covering 80% of the world's oil and gas production every year. But it will also capture farming.
So that's what MethaneSat does, with the aim of creating the first global methane map for all to see, ushering in a new era of climate accountability. Something else it will do? Give Auckland University students some hands-on, real-life experience in the space industry.
We'll be using them for sort of analysing the telemetry data and sort of helping produce the sort of state of health reports. Probably be involved in also upload and download of telemetry and command data. So sort of actually get them hands-on, driving the satellite under supervision.
Vernon Lewis is the Senior Ops Engineer for MethaneSat at the university's Mission Control Centre.
It's fairly vital to sort of monitor methane emissions to help sort of help understand the effect on global warming and sort of where the emissions are coming from.
So in about, a year you'll be taking over the MethaneSat?
Yeah, initially the first few weeks will be Ball Aerospace, who are the manufacturer of the instrument. They'll be commissioning the satellite and then handing over to Rocket Lab for them to bring it into production and get that running up, and then they'll be handing over to us later on this year. Yeah.
And what will you do with it? What role does the university play in monitoring the satellite?
We'll be running it on a day-to-day basis. So effectively, the data will be provided or scheduled by the MethaneSat organisation, which I think is sort of basically done by Harvard and a few other scientific establishments. That will result in a sort of a selection of targets, which will then be fed into the mission operations software, which will sort of work out the controls to drive or work out the commands needed to drive the satellite. Those will all be scheduled up and run, and then uploaded the satellite once a day. So sort of we're there to make sure that the data's uploaded, or the commands are uploaded, the data's downloaded, sort of goes properly to its sort of endpoint, and sort of check on the state of the satellite on a regular basis.
So does this mean you have responsibility for it, or you're feeding into a part of it? Explain to me the Auckland University's role in the big picture.
We'll be running it. So basically, effectively, we'll have responsibility for making sure that it's working okay. If there are any issues, we'll then contact the various providers. So it'll be, the satellite and instrument manufacturers to sort of work out any resolution to any issues that do arise, but we'll be monitoring it for sort of correct operation.
And do you have a say in where it goes, or is it pre-programmed?
No, it's the orbit is relatively fixed. There will be various propulsion burns to sort of keep it in a stable orbit. So the orbit's fixed and known, but the actual targets it selects is driven by sort of another part of the methane set organisation. So they're selecting the targets, and those will be sort of scheduled up a few days in advance.
And so what can you see when the satellite crosses over, and what takes its snapshot of?
Yes, it's measuring the reflected sunlight essentially, but measuring visible light. Well, it's actually infrared. Measuring the light in two wavelengths, one for oxygen and one for methane. And by comparing the ratio of those two, it gives you a measure of the level of methane.
Okay, so methane sits on the light prism, and you can analyse the gas from there. Yeah. And how focused can you get?
The satellite itself has what's called a swath, a width. You measure a sort of a slice that's 200 kilometres wide, and then as you travel over the Earth, you're multiply measuring that slice, so you generate a square of sort of 200 kilometres by 200 kilometres, and that's several thousand pixels across. So I think you'll have something like I can't remember the exact ground resolution, but it's a few tens of metres. So
can you get down to the individual pixels and work out
so it's
reasonably where the, say, leak is coming from?
Yeah, you should be able to target them within a few kilometres, and that sort of thing gives you enough information to point out to someone sort of, your oil's leaking.
Part of the government's deal with the Environmental Defence Fund is that New Zealand gets to use the data and the university gets to play a part in running the satellite. It will do so through its Space Centre, a project funded by the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment under its Strategic Science Investment Fund, to the tune of $3.35 million so far. There'll be further contracts covering work over the next 4 or 5 years to do with the Methane Sat program. Will it be giving us information about our own country, or are our methane emissions too minor to pick up on this kind of
the initial aim is to look at global methane emissions, and sort of it's the oil and gas producers are the largest volume at the moment. So initially we'll be concentrating on that, but also we're hoping to use the data to look at agricultural methane emissions.
So it's that the equipment is that focused that it will pick up, farm emissions.
It remains to be seen. I mean, we'll find out when it's in. We'll find out when it's in orbit and operation. We shall see how sensitive it is.
Okay, but the main thing is to work out where oil and gas pipelines are leaking, that kind of thing.
Yes, and oil fields and gas fields. So you can check where, basically stop the methane emissions at source, or at least from the oil and gas thing. And those are the major sources. So if you knock those on the head, that has the same effect as actually reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So
and methane is so much more potent, isn't it? I mean,
yes, it's about 30 times as potent as carbon dioxide over its lifetime. It is one of those gases. It decays. Carbon dioxide goes into the atmosphere and stays there. Methane has an effect for about 100 years. Now, its initial effect is about 80 times the effect of that of carbon dioxide, but it does decay over time.
So knocking it on the head now is a great contributor towards.
It will help slow the greenhouse gas warming. Yeah.
How wonderful is it to be able to say to Auckland University students, do you want to be part of the space program?
Yeah, I mean that's the whole. One of the best things about it is you get to teach the next generation, and here's how we do it, and give them the skills to go out and contribute worldwide, and hopefully build the Kiwi space industry. And feed them into places like NASA and other.
I was going to say, what do they do next when they graduate? Is there any other opportunities for them in New Zealand, or do they have to go overseas?
Rocket Lab is the obvious local destination. The New Zealand aerospace industry is growing, so there are people like Kia and sort of other sort of new space companies are developing. So there is it is a growing area for people who if they want to stay in the country, there is more opportunity there. But it's all it's very young sort of startup stage stuff at the moment.
And is this the sort of ground floor of our very fledgling space involvement? Like, if we didn't have this kind of thing, bringing up that next generation to take part in the industry, would we just sort of lose traction?
Not necessarily. This helps. I think sort of it's the more of an ecosystem you have and encourage, the better the growth opportunities. At the moment, sort of it's mostly everyone goes to Rocket Lab because they were the only game in town. There are other small companies sort of coming through now as well. That sort of means there is more of a space industry, and we're trying to help build and encourage that sort of in New Zealand.
So how many of your students do you reckon will end up working at Rocket Lab?
Probably a fair percentage of them. I think quite a lot of the sort of
Rocket Incubator.
Yes, a lot of the sort of mechanical engineering students I think possibly end up there anyway.
What makes an engineering student decide to head to space rather than bridges or?
I think it's just cool,
Cool.
Yeah, when you were young, sort of watching space shuttle launches, and I don't remember the moon landings. Sort of not quite old enough for that. But yeah, it's just sort of it's always been one of the exciting areas. Cool stuff.
Here's someone who's grabbed the opportunity to work in this cool industry. Do you want to say something, Mahina? Lovely. I'm talking to Mahina Seth.
Sorry, that was the Imperial Death March.
Mahima is the university's junior operations engineer for Methane Sat, dressed for the launch today in her space-like silver puffer jacket, Star Wars lanyard and astronaut earrings. She's always wanted to go to space.
I think a lot of people that end up in working in the space industry often start with, I would like to be an astronaut, and I will not deny that I'm also one of them. However, I think that you've got to do it for the right reasons, and it takes a certain type of person to be doing that kind of work. And whilst there's a lot that you can do, there's also a lot that's out of your hands. So you've got to kind of do things in the meantime, find other meaning, I suppose, because the whole world can't revolve around becoming an astronaut.
In the meantime, she's looking up, directing a piece of space traffic. So how do you operate it? I mean, it's self-propelled, more or less. It goes round on its own pre-programmed track, right? So you're not sitting there with a joystick saying, let's go and have a look at Australia today.
No. It more or less would do its own thing, but I guess there's a few things that us as operators would look at, right? Like, for example, we would want to know that it's where it needs to be, especially for things like Methane Sat. We don't want to be just in a random part of the globe looking at some random bit of ocean or land, right? Like, we want to know that this is where we want to look. So that's a part of it, like kind of looking at where it is and is that something we want to look at. The other big part of it is also like looking at the spacecraft's health. How is it performing? Is everything kind of working as it's meant to? So no, we don't sit here with a joystick. We'd have keyboards, but no joysticks. Yeah.
So you'll be sort of trailing up the US coast or the Gulf of Mexico or places like that to look for the oil and gas rigs, that kind of thing. Large methane producing kind of tracts of land.
Yeah. I guess that's kind of what the mission is about, is just globally looking at all these things that I guess you could call them points of interest or areas of interest. So that's kind of why Methane Sat is going to be pretty much looking at things across the globe. So quite interesting to see what we find and how it all progresses. Yeah. Did
you ever think you'd be doing a job like this? We're sitting in the Auckland University's Mission Control Centre.
Yep.
Apart from the fact that everything, all the big screens have spacey things on them. It looks kind of ordinary.
Yeah. So your question, did I think I'd be here?
You'd be here?
Absolutely not. I think this role was something that was it was a bit of an unknown, but I didn't quite know exactly what it was when I signed up. I had a rough idea. I certainly wouldn't have been able to describe it as like, those people in the movies kind of thing, because I didn't know that was a part of it. And certainly all of this around us, like the Space Institute at Auckland Uni, and all of that is relatively new as well. And yeah, for a long time, I thought like my options were pretty limited as far as doing things in space related. So I think I'm quite lucky to be here, honestly, because there's just one of me in this team, and a lot of capable people around me as well. So it is absolutely phenomenal to have this opportunity to learn a part of space exploration and operations. I just didn't even really know what it was.
Because when you studied, I presume at Auckland Uni?
Yes, I did, yeah.
This was not a thing.
No.
But now, look at all these kids outside watching this launch today.
Yeah.
Those students have a potentially different future lined up.
Yeah.
I mean, that must make you feel pretty good.
Of course. I don't want to put myself under any pressure to kind of lead the way or anything like that. However, I do want to make it so that people can look around and see that there are more than 2 or 3 options available to them, and those would just be the kind of working for a company or going overseas or getting into academia, I think. Because that's certainly the way I thought before this opportunity came along. And I was like, okay, let's try it,
Can you describe it to me and what all these things do? So you've got some huge big screens lining the place, and that's what you're tracking satellites, your live feed to SpaceX. What do these double screens at the front do?
We can put anything we like on any of these screens, but yeah, you correctly identified the larger ones up there. The one on the furthest left over there doesn't really have much running. It's trying to make a connection to something. The middle one is my workstation that is driving all of the background software that I've written to do that tracking up there. And it's also looking at another database for other satellites to get some information and see potentially when there might be information available about methane sat. And this one over here is just looking at weather close to the launch site. Obviously, as we know, launches can be delayed for many reasons, but weather is a prime suspect. So we were keeping an eye on that because we really wanted it to launch. And so we're really pleased that it did. But yeah, that's what you're seeing.
And this big screen with the globe on it and covered in yellow, orange and green dots, are they all satellites?
There are a mixture of spacecraft, space things, debris, small objects. So they're classed in different ways: small, medium, and large objects. What does that mean? Debris, well, we know space debris, like bits of old spacecraft, actual spacecraft, and rocket bodies, i.e., like different stages of a rocket and things. So that's what you're seeing up there, is all of those around the Earth.
It's just like a normal lecture room, but it's double glassed for soundproofing and it's secure.
Sure.
So what if someone got in here, could they do a bit of damage?
Well, they could do a bit of damage if they got into your laptop too, but it just depends on what we've got going here at the moment. But there's a lot of levels of security and protocol to make sure that doesn't happen.
And in under a year, the hands-on work begins as methane sat is handed over.
There's a bit of a passing of the torch kind of situation happening. So yeah, we will be working closely with Rocket Lab to to kind of get a feel for how things are done, and all that sort of training and that kind of thing. It's definitely not just here you go, see you later kind of thing. That's not.
So there's quite a bit of interaction between the university and Rocket Lab.
There will be,
And I guess this is where your students, a lot of the students here, will end up.
I think, a lot of our graduates end up working at Rocket Lab. I've got a lot of friends here from uni that are over there, so yeah.
And it means that if you're studying space here, you don't inevitably have to leave home.
Yeah, which is quite cool, I think. Because as I said earlier, it's, I thought my options were pretty limited as far as what I could do. Even within New Zealand, lots of companies are starting to get into this space. That was a good pun. No, is that a pun?
But it's a very growing industry.
It is. It is. And given the size of our population and our landmass and all of that sort of stuff, that's kind of phenomenal that we get the opportunity to do anything like this here.
So why did you get into it?
Why did I get into space?
Apart from your obvious fascination with Star Wars.
It wasn't actually Star Wars. I think I was kind of fascinated with space long before I was into Star Wars. So I'm from India. I came here when I was about 10 years old. So just before then, I think they had the Challenger disaster, NASA did, and on board there was an Indian astronaut. Well, she was American, but she was of Indian descent. And, that obviously caught the attention of a lot of Indian people around the world.
And now, of course, India's gone to the moon.
Yeah, which is, it's kind of crazy to just see how everyone around the world is kind of, progressing on this front. But yeah, I just remember kind of looking at her, even though things, didn't quite go right. But I don't know, I just kind of looked at it and thought, I'd like to do that.
That's all for today. Thanks to Mahima Seth, Vernon Lewis and Auckland University's space team. This episode was engineered by Rangi Powick and produced by Gwen McClure, and I'm Alexia Russell. The Detail is supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Live long and prosper.